Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Really quick, can I say something? Are we able, when do we sort of adjust the agenda? I want to make a recommendation to have the last presentation, which is the Crowley Act reform, be the first presentation presented on tonight.
So we have a motion on the table
Second.
to move item 9.1, budget presentation. After public comment, before public comment?
No.
Just presentation.
Correct.
So we have a motion to move 9.3 as the first item of presentations. So we have a motion, do I have a second? We have a second. Any discussion?
Just to clarify, we're changing, essentially swapping 9.3.
Yeah, third presentation or first presentation? So I have a motion, I have a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carried. Do I have a motion now? No problem, Mr. Stevens. Do I have a motion now to approve the agenda as amended? I have a motion?
Second.
And seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is public comment, right to be heard. First on our list, we have Mr. Jeremy Sensen. Welcome, Mr. Sensen. Yeah, 3 minutes, you can begin when you're ready.
Thank you, members of the board, for for holding space for public to be heard, because I think that's important. So I wanted to talk a little bit tonight, kind of just initiate a conversation with the board about the agenda item having to do with the authority of this board under the Crowley Act. And I know there's going to be some discussion about what this legislation that was passed last year looks like practically for the board. And again, as I brought up before, I was a member of the Johns Hopkins team that reviewed the district. The name's on the document. And there were some themes that were brought up. And this is the fourth school year now where we've been under state control, and there's been a routine narrative that part of one of the main goals was to eliminate, quote, layers of bureaucracy. But what we've seen is that there are no layers of accountability. There are no layers of oversight. Things end up being vetted through non-traditional ways. Sort of, we end up having news that's shared via social media, for example. We can't get to some of the positive things that are happening in the district, and we're not able to hear directly from the people we're all here to serve, ultimately the students and the families. And I give clear examples of this. You've heard personally, each member of this board, from the Washington Park, Southside, Broad Street community about what it was like to have their school shut down without any input, without any opportunity to be heard. And that was largely because this board, at the time, had no statutory authority and really had no role as a result. So what is the role of this school board? Why are you giving up so many hours and so much time to make this a better district, to help us create the schools that our kids deserve? So we have legislation where you have advisory capacity. And I think 2 weeks ago, Senator Zurier actually introduced language through legislation that would codify the idea that this board not only advises, but it approves. RIDE spoke against that. And I find it interesting that one of the 3 pillars of the TAP is engaged communities. There is no place where a community can be more engaged in their education, in their school system, than at the local school board. And even while under state control, there should still be a mechanism where the people we serve can be heard. That place is the school board. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to add a layer of bureaucracy, but it does mean that some of the hiring decisions, for example, and it shouldn't be limited to 3 people who answer to 1 person on an org chart. It should be all of these people who are going to have a hand in shaping the district. We just heard from Dr. Montañez about some fantastic hires that this district made. What would be the harm? What would be any negative in having this body vet and approve these candidates? We've seen some negative aspects. We've seen a superintendent hired through a process that was not public, it was not vetted by the school board, that set back the work of this district a significant amount of time, and ultimately hiring decisions that caused risky situations for children in this state. Anything that current leadership is doing well could certainly shine under a brighter spotlight and have more buy-in, more collaboration, more acceptance, and more enthusiasm if this board has an active role in district policy and in the hiring of key members of the staff and the team. And I think this board could go a long way in helping bridge the gap. Frankly, I appreciate leadership's movement to highlight some of the positive that's going on, because for a long time, it was much easier to focus only on the negative when we don't know what the process is and how decisions are made. So there's an opportunity here for you to consider as you hear what the role may or may not be, how important it is for you to have an active role. And finally, I would say the takeover is not going to last forever. And this board and this body, which is the intent of Senator Zurier's legislation, is ultimately going to have to receive the district back and be that place where the community is able to see what's happening in the district, to have a voice in what's happening in the district. And it's important that we start that process and start those steps now so that we can build a better system. Dr. Martinez was there last week. We talked about it, we say it repeatedly. There's opportunity here because, for all of the negative, that gives us the opportunity to write the best comeback, the greatest comeback story in the history of American education. They're going to write things about how out of what wasn't working, we built something special. But we need an engaged school board with a formal role in the process to do that. So I'd just like you to consider that as we hear what your role may be. Think about what the role could be. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. Next on our list is Caitlin Crudell. Thank you, Ms. Crudell. You have 3 minutes. You can start when you're ready.
So you guys already have seen like I'm trying to run here. So my main thing that I'm coming here for is I went to a PAC meeting 2 meetings ago, and Javier was there, and a PAC member reached out to me, and me and a couple other parents were promised a meeting as a school with superintendent and the commissioner, and have yet to get it. So I'm here to wonder why they're hiding from us. Because if they want to engage the community as they state they do, because they say in every meeting, why aren't we being talked to, spoken to? Personally, I have been blocked from calls, emails, social media, from the commissioner, the schools department itself. I've been blocked from the governor, and then when I called out the governor on it, he unblocked me. So it's more of why are we blocking parents instead of engaging with them? So I kind of leave that on your mind since you work with them in your careers. And maybe you guys as a group, as a whole, could actually reach out to them and say, why are you being so stupid? Because honestly, they're being stupid. That's out of all respect. I have done multiple conferences with the press, with news, and even with everything. All I get back is, we're pissed, but they don't want to address us. It's just we're mad. Another thing I want to bring up is I should pull up on my phone. There it is. The school has finished at a 1.46 growth on test scores, which is extremely high. So I want to know why we're shutting down a school that has growth in their test scores and not closing schools that have failing test scores. And maybe you guys can help with that, because they clearly don't care.
Thank you, Ms. Crudell. I have no further sign-ups for public comment.
I was gonna ask this nice person if I could speak.
Cutoff was at 4 o'clock. You need to do it.
We do have a sign-up deadline, but If you have,
I'll be
no,
brief.
there's no opposition from the school board members. We take a brief testimony for 3 minutes.
I'll be very brief.
Thank you.
My name is Ariana Packard. I'm a teacher at Mount Pleasant High School. And I want to speak to all of you. First of all, thank you for hearing me and good evening, greetings. I want to let you guys know that Mount Pleasant High School is worth fighting for. We have been doing amazing things. I'm very proud of all of us and especially of our students. We are sending our marching band to Washington DC next weekend to march to the Memorial Day Parade. Many of those, tens of those recipients of the biliteracy are from Mount Pleasant. And we have spectacular sports teams too. I'm just concerned that our capital expenditure budget was slashed by $25 million. And I would ask you and all of us in this room, hopefully, to do everything we can to keep Mount Pleasant High School in the existing building, to fix the building. Don't close the building. And yet I'm somehow witnessing the slow destruction of our school with the strange proposal to build another building in the backyard and to cut the freshman class in half. And I just want to let you know that Mount Pleasant High School is worth fighting for, and I hope that I have your support in fighting for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further signups, we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is school board member comments. Are there any comments from school board members?
I just got two.
Mr. Stevens, you have the floor.
Thank you. First, can we please fix the camera that's showing the storage door on the live stream? And then second, I'm just happy with the hire of Miss Karina Pinto. You as well, Suzanne Zinche. I don't know too much about you, but I'm thankful of you as well. But definitely, Miss Karina Pinto, truly happy that she is going to be the chief of face. Truly represents the families of Providence. Definitely is a strong individual that a lot of people will respect. So I'm definitely honored as a board member that is who the committee has chosen. I'm happy that she's now working with you alongside you, superintendent, just as well as my other former principal, Miss Onyea. So just wanted to put that out there.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Any other first comments? Secretary Santos?
When the superintendent was announcing, kind of built on what Tyrell just said, I've been on the board a long while, and I kind of missed the tradition of welcoming new hires publicly in this setting. When they come, stand up and get their deserved applause. I think it's really nice to do that. I think it helps to build community. I think it helps to build transparency. So,
Thank you, Secretary Santos. I'd like to make a presentation.
Yeah, so I mean, this comment's really just more for us, as a school board, I guess it's everyone here, but we don't really get together. And it's more about like absenteeism and sort of like mental health. And I think I'd like to more focus on like sort of like high school students at least, because that's the most exposure that I've had. And you know, we all know absenteeism is a huge issue. And there could be individuals, leaders that maybe want to look to sort of like penalize families, youth, create, you know, more stricter aspects on that. But there's been a lot of research, especially since the pandemic, that there's a huge sort of anxiety and mental health crisis that sort of exists, especially with our young people. And one thing that was highlighted to me especially is, you know, I have the privilege of working at Fidelity. I hosted Central High School students, a great group of 32 students on our campus. We had a career panel. And, you know, you would think like a lot of the questions are focused like, how did you get here? What stocks should I invest in? How do I become a millionaire, right? Those type of questions. Half of those questions were, how do you deal with pressure, right? Sort of like mental health related questions. That were half of the questions among our young people. And that was sort of eye-opening because, again, we more think about sort of the traditional questions that, you know, that exist with our young people. And it really put me back to conversations I've had around absenteeism and sort of how we deal with it as a board. So as we look in terms of like the future of our actions and what we do as a board, I think mental health really needs to be part of the focus of what we do, how we're taking care of our young people, especially with social media and just other stresses and aspects going on at home. So I would encourage us that when we have further conversations around absenteeism, we just think broadly of what's going on at the home instead of just looking to sort of like penalize our parents and our children. So again, I just wanted to put that statement of observation here because I don't really get a chance to speak to especially this group of folks on a regular basis.
Thank you, Vice President Escobar. Ms. Aiken.
Yes, I would also like to remind everybody that May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and tomorrow is Mental Health Action Day. So, take some time to rejuvenate, take a walk, a nature walk, grab a friend, take care of yourself. And, if you are feeling down or you need someone to talk to, you can always call a medical professional or number 988 for a confidential inquiry on how you can get the needed help. Don't go it alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Personally, I'd like to acknowledge sorry, there's more.
I can go after.
No, Mr. Mutsa, go ahead.
Okay, I wanted to thank Mr. Sensor for his comments to the board, and also to say that I think you can be sure that all of us would be really proud to be part of a great comeback story for the Providence public school system. As a new board member, it's been a little bit disorienting to come to board meetings and watch previous board meetings and see that some of the constituencies that need to work together to have a successful school system have often seemed to be at odds with each other. And when I talk about the main constituencies, obviously you have the school board and central office and RIDE and the PTU and the parent community and the mayor's office. And there are others obviously too. And I think that, I've taken some time since I joined the board to meet people from all of these different constituencies, including some who receive a lot of criticism for things that have gone wrong in the school system in the past. And the thing that I've found is that everybody wants the same thing. And I think we're all here for the same reason, which is, to invest in the children and the professionals of the PPSD now and in the future and help set things on a different course. And, I think all of us on the board, I think I speak for everybody and probably for everybody out there too, that if we all can find that commonality, even when we disagree about specific things that are in front of us, we all remember that commonality and find a way to work together, then we're going to set this thing on a totally different course. And I know we can do it. And I'm on some level, I'm kind of happy I wasn't here for some of the previous stuff, but I'm also really happy that I'm here right now, with this group and with all of you out there too. Because I think we all believe in the same thing, and I'm optimistic that we're going to do it.
Thank you, Mr. Mutsa. Before I start down my rabbit hole again.
Yeah.
Any other school board members have any further comments? Seeing none, I just want to quickly echo Superintendent's congratulations of Chairman Ibiemi for completing his RIAS coursework in his leadership academy. Congratulations, Chairman. And then very quickly, I know last week was National Teacher Appreciation Week. So if you are a current educator or former educator, I'd like for you to quickly stand for us to applaud you for your public service. Any former current educators? Thank you for all you do. As a brief educator myself, I know how lonely, how thankless, and how difficult the job can be. So thank you for all you guys do for our community every single day. All right, hearing no further school board comments, we're gonna move on to the next item on the agenda. Next item on the agenda is school board committee updates. We're gonna start with policy committee, Secretary Santel.
Okay, so the policy committee has been very busy. So we passed two very important mission critical policies in our last meeting, which are on this agenda for first read. That's the racial and ethnic equity policy and the multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS policy. These are kind of system-wide policies. They are more than just sort of statements of mission, value, or belief, though they are very much that. And both of them, if they are implemented in the way that we hope, have the very real possibility of being transformative in the education of our children and the practice of our district. For that reason, I would like to step somewhat outside of precedent and invite two members of the PPST team, one for each policy, to very briefly just tell the public a bit about what these two policies are and how they will change things. I think most of us probably think we know what the racial and ethnic equity policy entails, but multi-tiered system of support for most of us who are not professional educators sounds like jargon, but it is not. It is enormously important. So, so Dr. Onyé, if you would be willing to tell everybody really just briefly about the policy, and then Julie Lombardi will probably tell us about it.
And before that, we don't want congratulations, Dr. Onyé. Didn't you just get an award recently?
I did.
Yeah, you want to tell a little bit about that? Because I think it's a great organization.
Yeah, great. So thank you. First of all, good evening, board president, superintendent. I was very blessed and honored to receive an award from Arise,
Yes.
an organization that I have watched and followed for many years. They do amazing work. Shonda Womack, I don't know if you know her.
Sure.
You've heard of her? She's
I don't know.
a fireball. So I was really pleased, especially because it involves students, and that's the core of our work. I love what you had to say about bringing the entities together. At the end of the day, it's all about kids. Like, we have to just come to a realization, no matter where we work in this organization, whether it's in this building or in schools, that what unifies us is the fact that we're fighting for students, young people, so that they can leave us and be well-adjusted and be great citizens of this country and do really good work. And I feel like Arise and many of our community organizations are grinding every day and oftentimes not seen. And so when I found that I was getting the Intersectionality Award, I was very honored and thankful. And it's just more inspiration to continue to do this work. So I appreciate you recognizing
I didn't put it in my my notes, but can we talk about the kids just to get a little future?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So we just had 12 students and 4 adults who returned from Tulsa. They were at the Team Harmony Conference in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and spent some time in Black Wall Street. I don't know if you know any of the history around Black Wall Street. They spent 3 days reading and learning with students from all over the country. And when we were approached about this, we were told that they had never had a contingent from Rhode Island. So our students last week were evidently the first group of students from Rhode Island to attend this national conference. They had a blast. They had a great time. They really pushed their thinking. We have a debrief tomorrow because they're on fire, and really saw the connection between what that conference and the work they're doing in the Respect Conferences and social justice action plans they're working on. So they were very grateful, very thankful. They had a great time. They came back really fired up, and we have a chat group and a WhatsApp group, and they're still talking about it. And so one of our students won an award, our senior, Janae Maloney, who goes to PCTA. She happened to win an award. 2 of our students did some amazing spoken word up on the stage in front of people they just met. Providence students are amazing. And we have to keep doing everything we can to get that word out. Our students are amazing, they're smart, they want to do good work, they're very inquisitive, they're intellectual, they're talented, and every time we give them the opportunity and space, they rise and rise and rise, that's what they did last week. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. Okay, the policy. So when I came on board, the last time I was in front of you, I believe it was when I first came on board in July. And I had the good fortune of being able to work with Trita Collier-Dickinman, who was the chief advisor here prior to coming on board. And we're really thinking about how we wanted to launch this work, where to start this work, because it had been paused for so long, and we had some really great funders who were waiting for this work to begin. And we had some people that were, quite frankly, very disappointed, and we had to figure out a way to really re-energize them, but also have a very smart start and strategic starting point for the work. And you of you who know me know that I'm a policy systems process person. I like policy. I don't necessarily love writing it, but I love the idea of policy. I feel like that's oftentimes, if it's well written, is the roadmap for the work. And so one of the things we did was to take a look at the current policy, which was very good work, but it was done in 2017. And so much has happened in this world since 2017. The world is changing like crazy. So we decided to start there and think about who we could bring together to begin to take a look at the current policy and think about what more needed to be added to make it more robust, but also to be able to create entry points for different stakeholders. So we wanted to make it accessible for parents, for students, for, of course, for educators, for community members, et cetera. So we created an equity advisory council in December. We're really proud of that, and that's a cross-section of individuals from all sectors. So we have parents, we have university professors, we have central office people, we have parents, community members, teachers, PTU, Mary Beth and Jeremy have come to every meeting. Monthly, we meet every month in the PD equity. And one of their first tasks was to give us input on the equity, race and equity policy. We wanted to hear from them. By the way, there are 10 students part of the council as well. And so we embarked on creating a framework, a template for them to work through to provide us feedback. And we also made it a Google Doc, so we were able to leave it open for 2 to 3 weeks so that they could actually dump a lot of their feedback in writing, so we take a look at it and then turn it around for them to give them a chance to look and see if we had captured what their thoughts were. We also gave them tons of research. They had a lot of reading to do, lots of links to what different districts around the country are doing. A lot of cities and states are embarking on this work jointly. And the result is what you have in front of you now, which is, I believe we have now, I'm not sure how many pages we're at now. We started off with 3 pages with the original, and we are at 11 pages now. So we have 11 pages of policy here. We spent a lot of time, particularly on the definitions, because we found that one of the biggest issues is really this idea of a lack of understanding of what words mean. And so we wanted to make sure that we can't capture everything, but some of the most important language or vocabulary that was needed to access this document, we wanted to make sure that was included. So we spent a lot of time talking, looking, researching on what were the best definitions for some of the words that we knew would be important to understand in this work. And then we spent a lot of time around the guidance and the implementation strategies. And that's really important because the next step of this, once this is passed, I'm speaking of the affirmatives, is that we've actually kind of already started, but we want to make sure we have really strong regulations from this policy so that schools, districts, people will understand how to implement this work. Otherwise, it's just a document that will sit on the closet and get dusty. We want this to be a policy that people are using, they're taking it seriously. When we talk about equity, we're developing common language, common thoughts, and to be quite frank, we talk about transformation. Dr. Sattel continues to talk about this idea of this being transformational. This is transformational, and it's because it affects everyone. I have the pleasure and also sometimes the horror of really having to work with everyone. As an equity office, I can't just work on things in isolation. My team and I are constantly collaborating with other departments in this building all the time. It has to be that way. And so this equity policy has the opportunity to be transformational because it requires everyone coming together. When we start to write these regulations, it will involve everyone in the organization from top to bottom. And it's going to require that we come together no matter who we are and talk through our differences towards really being able to implement this well.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming up. I know this was somewhat unconventional to have people do that, but I really appreciate it. I appreciate you and your team and the enormously inclusive process that you've created for this. So the policy, of course, is just on for the first read, which means if we vote for it, it will come up for the second read and final passage the next time we meet. You know, I know I keep using that word transformative for this. You know, we have committed as a district back in 2017 to trying to be equitable in all the things that we do. But, and I was involved in some small way in writing that statement. And it was a statement that we're certainly proud of, and I am too. But this policy is much more than a statement. It offers the possibility of changing what we do from the ground up, holding one another accountable. If we vote for this policy, we are voting as a district and a school board to look through a lens of justice and equity in every single thing that we do. Racial equity is under attack in many places in this country. Public education is under attack in many places in this country. The effort to try and reckon with the ongoing impact of slavery and racial apartheid in this country is under attack. But as James Baldwin once said, we have not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And by committing to this policy, we begin to face it. So thank you, Dr. Anya. I appreciate it. We're going to shift gears, and then I will let go of the meeting, I promise. So the other policy, thank you, that we'll be looking at, which is MTSS, multi-tier system of support. So Julie Lombardi is going to briefly tell us about that, and then I will cede the floor. Thanks, Julie, I appreciate it.
Okay, so similar to what Dr. Olney said, we also developed MTSS leadership team at the district level, comprised of one member from each department. We did look at the old policy and reviewed that and decided that there was a lot of old language and that we really kind of wanted to revamp the policy. So our goal was to develop a framework to be able to implement supports and interventions for students so that all students can succeed. It is a layered model. So when you think about the tier 1 supports, those are your universal support. So it's what every student and all students get. And at that level, we hope that many of those students would succeed at that level, but we know that there's other students that need more support. So then we go into the next layer, which is the tier 2 support, which is more of our targeted students who may need, so when you think of the targeted students, thinking of students you would take in small groups, do some interventions with, they would also get the tier 1 support on top of that. So it's definitely layered. And then thinking about the tier 3 support, those of our students who would get the tier 1 and tier 2, but need more individualized supports. So the hope is that, and the goal is that this framework puts some procedures and some systems in place so that we can support students and we have a process for it. And that it's a clear process and it's streamlined across the district, not, every school is doing their own thing, that it's universal, across the board. So.
Thank you, Julia, appreciate it. Yeah, and so last thing I'll say, just in support of this, the amount of work that went into this policy, I know has just been tremendous with you and Sandy and your team. I don't know how much much went into it the first time too. So thank you very much for explaining all of this to those of us not in the know and for all the work that you've done on it. And very much similar to and in tandem with the equity policy. If this is properly resourced, enforced, so forth, as we go forward in the next couple of years, it provides our teachers, our educators, everyone in the district with the tools that they need to see each of our kids as individual whole human beings, which to me is very much in the heart of equity as well as good education, good parenting too, for that matter. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So that's the end of my very long sideshow here on the policy committee. So we sent those through on first read, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Santana. I just want to commend your leadership in making sure that these two very important policies, were shepherded past, or they're getting towards the finish line. And so when we talk about the possibilities of what an advisory board can still do, your leadership in this regard is an example of what is possible. So thank you, Secretary Santana. Next item on the agenda is a Finance Committee update. Chairman Abiyan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, Thursday, we had quite some time at the Finance Committee looking at about 15 contracts, which is being presented tonight from 6.5 to 6.21. We did our due diligence on all of them to make sure that every expense is justified. But I have a little observation. When we meet at the Finance Committee and we go through things, we make some recommendations. There might be minute recommendations, some little things that, if we are in FY23, we expect FY23. But if we're in FY23 and it's ticked as FY24, it may not matter because it's not affecting the figure, but for the reason why the committee is set up, everything needs to be done. So I'm going through some contracts, and Ms. Tony is my witness. When we came this afternoon, she said, "Have they taken care of the corrections that we asked to be taken care of?" So I said, I answered, I said, yes. But on the other mind of hindsight is, let me just go through this here and make sure that they do it the way we recommended that it should be done. Because it will not be fair to us to come to this committee and say, everything is okay, we already gone through things, but knowing at the back of our mind that the corrections, the minute corrections were not made. If we don't take care of the minute one, when they become big, we're going to leave them also. So, of particular, I have two that I'm just going through right now. 6.7 is Harvard Graduate School of Education. So this contract, well presented for the benefit of the school district, but you just said 2 years. 2 years, that is vague. We don't know when 2 years begin. We don't know when it's going to end. All we ask for is that, okay, that 2 years, when does it begin? When does it end? I'm seeing the contract now. It's still the same thing that was given to us last Thursday. Also, 6.16, Amplified Science. It's still showing FY23 when this is a contract that is supposed to be FY24. So these little things that we ask for, the reason why we have a committee that vets this before it's been presented to the bigger board is to make sure that we've done all our due diligence. So in this situation, I think, I just caught this, and it might be something that we've not been putting into consideration. So I just want to humbly ask that the district should do their things. Sometimes we get reports, we get all this finance, and like the figure doesn't add up and all that, and we have to do that. But many times it's been corrected. But I just want to point this to the attention of whoever is responsible for this, to make sure that what is being presented to the finance committee is accurate. And if it's not accurate at the finance committee level, by the time it gets to the general board, it has to be 100%. Because this is our responsibility, and we have to do it with effectively and efficiently. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I don't know if your concerns warrant a reconsideration, or I don't know if there's anybody from the district who wants to be responsive to the concerns that you raised in your committee. Do you have a recommendation, Chairman?
No, like I said, these are small things, just change the dates, make sure the paper, the contract summary is active. So, I mean, if this board decides that we're not gonna approve this until it is taken care of, I'll be more than happy. That, because we need to start doing what is just. One of the contracts myself and Mr. Tony were looking at, takes effect from May of 2023 to August of 2023. And a lot of questions were asked, and although they answered it effectively because we're looking at, so what is the justification for spending $150,000 for a period that is starting from like 31 days? But they gave us the work that has been done before they presented it, and it was justified. Things like that are appropriate, but when we ask that, take care of this, change these dates, do this, add this together, and we expect that by the time it is presented for the general board, those corrections are made.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there anybody from the district who'd like to respond or comment to the chairman's concerns regarding these items that came out of Finance Committee? Deputy Superintendent Zach Scott.
Can everyone hear?
Not yet, try again.
Any better? We go Michaelis? So it's a good catch. We can update this. I think what Mr. Idiemi is talking about in particular for the two contracts you mentioned is there's a tick box where you tick the appropriate fiscal year. Below, people have written the dates of the contract, but I think in these cases they ticked off the incorrect fiscal year. So we can update that. I would strongly ask that we still move ahead with approving these in that, in my mind, it's a clerical error, will be one we need to get right for all the reasons you mentioned. But for things like Amplify, which is curriculum for the next school year, we want to make sure we are ordering them as soon as possible. So that doesn't excuse the fact that those weren't corrected, so I apologize for that. But I would ask politely that the board those.
Superintendent?
How long is it gonna take you to switch those dates and fix those two issues?
We could have it done by this evening. It's very.
If it's simple, then I'll agree with you, but that's for the board to make a decision. But I need to make sure that those are cleared and they're fixed.
Understood.
I wasn't able to attend the finance meeting.
Mr. Stevens?
Sorry. When we say this evening, what time this evening? Are we able to revisit the contracts, those two contracts at the end of the meeting today?
Yes.
Okay. So could we hold off on it until after the presentations, just those two contracts? Okay.
Mr. President,
Chairman of the I defer to your recommendation as chairman of the Finance Committee.
I think we should, I want to make a motion that we should approve it. But I think it is well said by the superintendent and Mrs. Abdul, and he was at the meeting last week also. So as long as we do the due diligence, it's not affecting any figure, it's not adding anything, it's not subtracting anything. It is just that when we say 24, it should be 24. So I don't think it's a big deal, but I would make a motion that we pass it so that they can start working on it.
Understood. So it's still part of the consent agenda, but your recommendation is to pass, Chairman. Understood. Any more discussion on items out of Finance Committee? Moving on to Health and Wellness Committee, Chairman Mahingabo.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had the Health and Awareness Committee meeting on April 26th, and we reviewed the health curriculum revision updates for the elementary and the secondary school. And one of the things that we talked about with the district is that, like, if we're gonna make any changes in these curriculums, we need to make sure parents are aware of these changes. We need to make sure this curriculum are up on the websites So that is something that I'm gonna work with the presidents and also superintendents to make sure that it's done. And also we had a presentation on social and emotional learning for the fall screening report. And also we review screening and assessment system for social and emotional learning. I'm happy that teachers are given tools they need to identify students that are struggling and giving help they need to make sure the students succeed. And also we had Dorcas International Institute, officially joined Health and Awareness Committee. And also we had the WEPM, a Refugee Youth Power Movement created by the Providence students. So they joined the committee as well. And Dorcas basically, for those who don't know, Dorcas is a refugee resettlement agency. And they were able to partner with the district to create after school program for middle schooler in Gilbert Middle School. And where they help new newcomer and also they get to play 30 minutes soccer after. And also they have also another program in Central High School where they help refugee students that are struggling, especially seniors. And I encourage board members to go out there and visit and study those who like soccer. And yeah, that's all I had. I don't know if Ms. Akim want to add anything.
It was a very, very interesting presentation, the biomass 2 study specifically, and how that data is used to do the activities that you just described, to help students that are struggling and to get them, academically improving their grades, get them to improve recreational activities. And it was very, very interesting and engaging as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Seeing no other school board committee updates on the agenda, next item on the agenda is consent agenda. So approval of item 6.1 through 6.21. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? I have a motion.
A second.
I have a motion. I have a second. Any discussion?
Observation.
Chairman Levine.
I want to humbly request that any items that relate to finance be pulled out of that consent agenda and stand alone. So in case we have any recusal, any observations, anything, we just don't pass like that. I think we should have that we used to have it like that, that items of finance will be separate. So that in case we'll be looking at each of these items, instead of just making like motion, so moved and so supported. So if we have any observation or have any correction, we won't be able to do it because we're passing it en masse. I want to humbly request that we pull out any items of finance as a standalone item on the agenda.
Thank you for that comment, Chairman Ibiemi. I believe it's a conversation we can take offline, discuss with our clerk, discuss with the solicitor, and make sure that we're doing that appropriately. But very fair observation. So we have a motion, we have a second. We're still in discussion portion. Any further discussion?
I just
Vice President Escobar.
Chairman Ibiemi, are you suggesting we start doing this tonight? Was that your suggestion, or just like in the future you would like for us to do? But I just want to make sure that.
No, I think going forward, we may not do it tonight because of the urgency of the project, but going forward from next month, whatever is the items of finance, that's what we used to do before. So all of a sudden it became merged all together and there was nothing anybody can, we couldn't make any adjustments. But if you put it at a standalone in future, maybe like when we have next month meeting, I would love for it to be like that. So
you're okay with this being approved
yes,
as is tonight?
Yes,
I just wanted to make clear.
Yes,
Thank you, Vice President Escobar. Still in discussion portion. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carry. Next item on the agenda, review of homeschool candidates. Welcome.
Welcome, good evening.
Just gotta speak loud. You ever been a teacher, Mark?
Frank cafeterias, I'll use the mic. So, good evening, my name is Mark Catone, I'm the Executive Director of Student Programming for the Providence School Department. I've met some of you in the past, I haven't met many of the new board members, so thank you for your service and being on the board. This evening, we're just presenting two names to you for approval. They've met the Rhode Island general law for homeschooling, and they met the requirements of our homeschooling policy. This will be the last group of homeschool students for the year, as it is now May. So I will present those to you for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Catone. Just really quickly, how do we end up in a situation where it's May and still approved?
So we do have students for various reasons, they want to be homeschooled, and they go through the process, they present the proper paperwork, they present an education plan, and there's different reasons why they want to do homeschooling. Could be for safety reasons, could be for other things, they're just not comfortable. We've met with school, we've talked to the principals, and we deemed it was appropriate that they can homeschool for the last 6 months.
And for our education, is it a by right process?
Yeah, it's the parents' right to homeschool. By Rhode Island general law, if they submit an application with the intent to homeschool, and they submit a letter of intent, and they meet the requirements of the Rhode Island general law to homeschool, we can't deny them.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Catone. So we have a recommendation. So approves homeschool candidates. Do I have a motion to accept the recommendation?
Motion.
A motion second. Any discussion? Ms. Aiken.
I have one question regarding the grades for homeschooled students. How are the parents taking the grades and submitting them to the department?
So if you're a homeschool student, depending on when you've been approved, there's an update that they have to send in mid-year and end of the year to show that the students have met the standards in order to be moved forward to the next appropriate grade. And in many cases, a lot of the parents are using a lot of these online programs that were developed during COVID. So a lot of times they'll be able to just print reports from the online program to prove that they've passed the courses. It gives you the grade, it gives you the number of hours they've been enrolled in the course and how much time they've actually put into the course.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aiken. Still in discussion? Any further comments, questions? Seeing none, we have first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Next item on the agenda is presentation, and as had previously been amended, we are going to start off with item 9.3, legal presentation on school board authority under the Crowley Act. Now, this is in response to the board's request during the last school board meeting that board counsel provide a legal opinion regarding the board's responsibility as it pertains to senior level administrators under the Crowley Act amendment. Mr. Solicitor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. TR, is it possible to pull up that document I sent you? Can you get into your email? I mean, is this showing your computer right now, or is it showing this one?
It's showing my computer.
Can we log in to your email on that computer?
No, it's over there. That one is the one that shows that.
Yeah, if there's any way that you could just log into that and then pull up that email, I just want to make sure that I can see the document. Good evening. I don't know if this is working, so I'm gonna forego the microphone. Just let me know if you can't hear me, but I provided and circulated to you, Mr. Chair, and the members of the board prior to this meeting, a memorandum detailing what I think is an appropriate interpretation of a specific amendment that was contained in the Crowley Act amendment in Senate Bill 2838B to address the board's question regarding what its responsibility is to review and advise the commissioner on the appointment of senior level administrators throughout the district. So pursuant to that new amendment, the board has a new responsibility to review and advise the commissioner on the appointment of senior level administrators. And that has to be done as part of its normal course of business pursuant to a properly noticed and convened meeting, because it's a responsibility of the board as a legal entity, not any particular member or subset of members. The responsibility to advise and review candidates or appointed by the commissioner is a legal responsibility of the board. So, in short, I concluded that that was the responsibility. And then with respect to what constitutes senior level administrators, provided a pretty brief analysis because in fact, there's really no guidance left as part of the legislative intent as to what was meant in terms of the term review and advise as to the senior level administrators. So if you look at the analysis, basically what I attempted to do was see if there was any correlating responsibility under Title 16 for any other agency. And as part of my analysis and in doing that, I wanted to turn the board's attention to the Education Accountability Act that was passed in 2019. So if you were to scroll down, and Kiara is gracious enough to pull that up for me, but if you were to scroll down in that, Kiara, to the general powers and duties of school committees. If you just scroll down. So those are the duties of the Commissioner of Elementary and Secondary Education. Keep going down for me. And you'll see general powers and duties. That's where we just were. Go back up, please. Thank you. A little further. So I think it's page 2 or 3. So I think it actually starts right there. So you can see 16.2.9 are the general powers and duties of school committees. So as of 2019, if you can scroll down just a little bit for me, you'll see that the legislature amended the general powers and duties of all school committees throughout the state. And if you go, I think, to number 12 or 13, sub 12 or 13 of A, 13. Formerly, what was number 13 was to give advice and consent on the appointment by the superintendent of all school department personnel. So that authority was removed from every school committee throughout the state under the Education Accountability Act of 2019. So whereas formerly school committees had the authority to make appointments and to consent to the appointments of the superintendent, including the appointments of administrators, that authority was taken away, not just as a result of the takeover, but from all school committees throughout the state by virtue of the amendment to the Education Accountability Act. And it was then vested in the superintendent. So if you scroll down, you'll find the powers and duties of the superintendent. Thank you, Kiara. Keep going down. Keep going. Right there.
Can you make it bigger?
Yeah.
At the top, it says 100, just do like 150.
Yeah, there you go.
Word of advice next time, attorney, can we please get this ahead of time?
It's cited in the memorandum.
Okay.
But I wanted to provide you with the actual language so you can see it. So if you scroll down to a little further, you'll see that that authority was then conferred to the superintendent to make those appointments without the approval requirement, the consent and advice of school committees. Keep going down for me, please. No, I think it's up for. Yeah. See, where it formerly said to appoint with the consent of the school committee, that authority was struck. So to appoint administrators or the personnel not assigned to individual schools, and also to appoint, and there's one that precedes it, which gives them the authority to appoint administrators assigned to schools. So generally speaking, there is no school committee in the state that has the authority to advise and consent to the appointment of administrators throughout the district. So the conferment of that authority to review and advise appointees of the commissioner is specific to Providence. But it has to be read in concert with this portion of the amendment, which doesn't give the authority to actually approve or consent. So we then turn to what is meant by senior level administrators. And the only parallel that I could find anywhere in Title 16 was the authority of the Council on Elementary and Secondary Education. So the Council on Elementary and Secondary Education has the authority to appoint certain senior level administrators of the Department of Education. Those administrators specifically pursuant to 1660-7 include deputy and assistant commissioners. So in looking at what this new authority of the board could potentially mean, you have to first look at what's the authority now, absent the Crowley Act under the Education Accountability Act. And is there any analogous statute in Title 16 that we can draw some type of guidance from? And in doing that, you find that the Education Accountability Act doesn't provide for any type of review and advise on the appointment of administrators for any school committee in the state. And the most analogous statute basically provides for direct reports to the commissioner as those individuals that the council would have the authority to review and approve. So I thought probably the most appropriate interpretation, drawing that analogy, would provide for the direct reports to the superintendent. Now that's an interpretation without any guidance as to what the legislature meant by senior level administrators. There's simply nothing in the statute or in the legislative intent that gives us any type of guidance. So I understand that post my opinion, there's been some conversation with the superintendent, and we have the ability to extend that beyond what we currently have, and extended that to the position of chiefs, which are not a direct report to the superintendent under our organizational structure. So really, that's how I analyzed the issue and came to the conclusion that the most analogous provisions in Title 16 would reflect only the direct reports, but we have the ability collectively to work on something that would maybe extend that a little bit further in this case. I think that's how we get to the position of chiefs.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor. And I just want to start off by saying that, well, thank you for being responsive to the board's request and delivering this legal memo by the time of this meeting. And I want to say that when I first read your memo, I was a little disappointed, not with your interpretation, but with your finding. And no reflection on you. Mostly, it's kind of upsetting that things weren't more specifically defined in statute that can provide us more guidance. So number one. But I do want to say that as soon as I was concerned, I reached out to the superintendent's office, and they were responsive to my concern. So my initial concern is, it's ridiculous for us to be an advisory forum, if you want to say an advisory forum for community input, and then only be able to advise on deputy superintendents and assistant superintendents. That leaves us with being able to review and advise on only probably 2 individuals. When I expressed my concerns to the superintendent, he did respond with a communication that has been forwarded to all school board members that says the interpretation as is kind of a flaw, and that if we work collaboratively, it could be expanded to include, as my interpretation reflects, chiefs. Superintendent, I don't know if you have any comment on that.
I think it's important as we continue to move forward, we have to work collaboratively. We all saying the same thing, we all want the same thing, and this is why. As soon as the president actually reached out to me with some concerns, I said, okay, so let's just take a step back and take a different look at this. And I think we came to grounds where we both felt value and the work to get done. So I just appreciate that we had the opportunity to work this way, and we'll continue to work this way.
Thank you, Superintendent. So we've come to sort of a mutual understanding of what senior level administrators will mean for us in this relationship moving forward. I think questions that we still need to be able to respond to on the record is what review and advise means, and at what point during the process that happens. I don't know if you're ready to respond to that tonight, Mr. Solicitor.
Well, I think I can, and I think I would respond by saying review and advise on the appointment means that there's already been an appointment, and that you're reviewing and advising on the candidate that has been selected pursuant to that appointment. And the review and advise component, as I indicated in the memo, does not include consent. So importantly, the word consent is excluded from the review and advise component, whereas it was formerly included, as you saw, in that section of the general powers and duties of school committees before it was struck under the Education Accountability Act.
We put the language of the Crowley Act back up. I just, you said, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and that's not
review and advise
Yes.
the is that the language that's in?
Review and advise the commissioner on the appointment of senior level administrators. And the language, I'm sorry, Mark, that's the Education Accountability Act. That is not, in fact, the Crowley Act.
Right, it's not the Crowley.
So this is generally the authority of all school committees and school boards throughout the state who aren't in state
Because
intervention.
if our authority is to advise, review and advise the commissioner on the appointment, I mean, I would interpret that to mean advise and review the process that leads to the appointment.
Correct.
Not just a finalist that shows up at the end, but at least one step prior to that, which would be the finalists. I mean, it's something for interpretation, right? But the way you just described the language to me doesn't imply there's an appointment, then we review and advise, but rather we advise the process of the appointment.
Well, I think you could advise on the process in terms of certain policy recommendations that you could make. But if you're talking about reviewing and advising on the appointments, whether you're acting as any administrative agency, you're presented with a candidate who is the identified appointee. And you're making a determination to either issue your advice and consent under most statutory constructs for that particular employee to be appointed, or you're not. You're not presented with multiple candidates. It's like a confirmation process of a judge. You're not presented with multiple candidates that, tell me which one you want. This is the identified appointment. You're either going to give your advice and consent, if you have consent authority, or you're not. And in this scenario, you don't have consent authority. What you have is the review and advise authority. So basically what you would be doing is you'd be presented with a candidate and you would have an opportunity to, potentially do a little research on this candidate and ask them what their intention is pursuant to, like, how are they going to advance the mission of the district, and, provide some type of advice to the commissioner on that particular appointment.
I guess I understand your argument. I guess my question is whether that in and of itself isn't just one reading of what it says, that there would be room for the board and the superintendents to come to an understanding that our role of review and advise starts perhaps a step earlier for at least some appointments. In other words, instead of the negotiation. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm looking at the language that you described there, I can interpret it more.
It's distinct from the standard advise and consent language, right? Because this is specifically not providing consent or being required to provide consent for the particular appointment. But I'm unfamiliar with any process where a legislative body or an agency body is reviewing something other than the identified appointee and providing their, advice relative to that particular appointee. So, whether it's any type of confirmation process, which the advice and consent process is typically modeled after, is simply providing that consent relative to that identified appointee. You don't have the authority to make the determination as to who the appointee will be or that the potential appointees.
So can I flip the question and say, would it be impermissible under the law for the board's review and advise role to take place earlier in the process, the appointment process?
Let me reference the Crowley Act again, because it may say specifically appointee, and we may be getting
let me explain why
appointment.
I'm asking the question, because I think having the board review and advise is not just simply to check an accountability box. It is also to put more committed stakeholder voices in the room to make sure we're hiring good people, right? The right people for the right roles. I know when I've been in positions of leadership making hires, I generally see it in my interest to try and include at least some folks in my department. It's in a university setting, so I understand it's very different. Who don't necessarily get a vote, but whose input is nonetheless valued. So I seek it out to make decisions. They don't get the chance to.
I think Secretary Samson's point is that we can be collaborative in the process leading up to the identified.
Exactly. We all win.
That dialogue is permissible. So, it's not statutorily required, but in our dialogue, with central office with the superintendent. If we find it mutually beneficial to have the school board be involved, whether it be in an interview panel for a certain position, that's a dialogue that can take place.
Yes,
And it's a matter of two parties come to agreement on that.
Yeah, I think it's like, there's a lot of, yeah, I'm sorry, there's just a lot of gray area even still in the situation, right? And we already have, this access or this ability to sort of like collaborate. Maybe it's something we put on paper. I mean, some of the things that I was thinking about, just sort of like getting down on paper, definition of senior level administrators, right? Just the transparency and decision making of how we're going about sort of these appointee process. Just the appointment approval in general. If the school board or a school board member is sort of like not with a decision, like where does that weigh as opposed to the overall committee, the decision-making process in general? It's just sort of like so I know for like Chief of Face, right, there was, school board process, there was like 1 or 2 members involved in that, but is it all 9 or is it just one person from the school board representing it, and who is that, right? There's still more grade levels, like executive sessions. We're also talking about just like hiring, right? This is the HR aspect. So if we're on the approval and consent, like is that being done in executive session or so on and so forth? I feel like there's like a lot of just gray areas. And just if we're on the HR side, is there sort of like training and guidance from this board in order to be part of the sort of like interview aspect? So and I really appreciate, the memo before. I just feel that, we have an agreement that we're going to work together. Maybe it's something we put, on paper that's formal, that's not only going to help this current board, but will help, a new iteration of the board going forward. So I feel like there's still just a lot of questions in terms of the process, but it seems like we have commitment that we, as a school board, will be able to be part of these higher level discussions.
Thank you, Vice President Escobar. Mr. Stevens?
What was I gonna say? When we say executive session to ask questions, what exactly do you mean by that?
If you're going to discuss the potential fit of any appointee in terms of their fit into the position, I think you'll inevitably end up potentially discussing their character and job performance, which would qualify for executive session discussion at their election to either have it held in open session potentially or an executive session.
I thought that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that only qualifies for actual employees of the district. If it's a candidate, that shouldn't apply because they're just a candidate, they're not official employees of the district.
I think they would still be covered on the job performance and character conversation.
Now, to some of the longer term tenured individuals, when we sort of had this process and we was able to approve, was that an executive session or was that in a public forum?
It was in a public forum, but the 2019 law that Charlie referenced before changed the nature of our power. I'm not sure how fully aware the board was of the change at the time, but it changed our practice previously. So and to be honest, the board had the power to consent and to be involved in hiring processes all the way down to like football coaches prior to 2019. The vast majority of the time we didn't exercise that except to vote thumbs up on the consent agenda. Before this meeting started, I flipped back on the electronic school board to the May 2019 meeting to see the folks we were hiring. So it's a very different legal circumstance now in terms of our power.
So is that
But it was not an
memo?
executive session. When we discussed the hiring of the superintendent, we had finalists. That was an executive session.
Correct.
Because when one applies for a position and you're a finalist, you have the right to expect a certain amount of confidentiality in terms of literally your application, because it will cost you the job you already have, as well as the details that are in there. So in an abundance of caution to protect people applying for high-level positions here, who may also be at high-level positions elsewhere in competition or whatever, I think, to me, it's reasonable to do it. I would argue.
Which is reasonable.
I'm not a lawyer or an HR person.
No, absolutely. And I think what I'll mention is, because I know one of the main things was sort of, and maybe this is a public board, so we can sort of represent the community on a broader scale, which we all do. But when we say transparency, I think when sort of my vision was before the state takeover, we got the new legislation. members or candidates will come before the board in an open session. The school board members will be able to ask questions, and then after the school board would either approve or deny the individual. I don't see the difference between the school board reviewing and advising on an individual that comes before the school board in that same kind of way as sort of the previously before the state takeover. So I get there's a new kind of, but I don't really see any kind of legislation that's saying that we cannot still sort of formulate it that way. Also, really quick, I know that we, go ahead.
Just on that point, so I can read you the subsection in its entirety, and it says, to review and advise the commission on the appointment of senior school district administrators, provided that the Providence school shall not have the authority to appoint senior school district administrators, so as long as the turnaround plan is in effect. And I think that's also, that's also contradicted by the Education, the Education Accountability Act. So, in terms of taking a vote, I think what you're essentially doing is you're having like a discussion item to provide your advice on the particular appointment, but it's not really a vote like yay or nay on the approval.
I know that. Yeah, no, okay. I know that. I understand that. That's not what I'm getting to. I'm getting to sort of the public forum of a candidate. Does that need to take place in executive session? I think that's kind of
probably most times it doesn't. I mean, when we formally did it, we did it on the consent agenda, I believe, Mark.
Yeah.
I think there could be some situations where, it may warrant having, if you're going to inevitably discuss and there's going to be a dialogue with the board regarding their fit, then it probably should be done in executive session versus what was formerly happening was the HR director was standing up and saying, this is so-and-so, they came from this particular district, they've got 15 years experience, and they're gonna be great. And usually the board would say, wish you the best of luck, we hope,
But, I mean, when those.
I'm sorry, Secretary Santel, so after Mr. Stevens had the floor, Mr. Matuka could ask for the floor.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just have one more question, then you can go. I did get an email from you, and I think it kind of changed now with the superintendent's sort of revision. April 10th, you said he was on vacation, but you said for a short answer, you would sort of think that executive directors and up would sort of be the individuals that we will review and advise on. I know you just were saying it's a short answer and stuff. Does that sort of fall under the forum of chiefs when we use the word chiefs? Because when I look at the org chart, there are in fact some executive directors that are on there. So
I think that was done prior to me really taking a closer look at the Education Accountability Act and the section related to the authority of the council on elementary and secondary. So when I dug into it more in preparation of the memo that I was writing the board, I was looking to see if I could draw some parallels under Title 16.
And when we say really quick chiefs, what does that entail?
So it's like a chief of equity. I mean, I understand there's approximately 9 people holding chief positions throughout the district. They include chief of human resources, chief. I had the list at one point. I don't have it presently in front of me, but
so that doesn't include executive directors.
It does not. No. So and the chiefs, I believe, are part of the executive cabinet of the superintendent, whereas the executive directors are not. They report to the chiefs, and the chiefs report, to the deputy superintendent or the assistant superintendents.
So an assistant superintendent also is not
would fall. No, the assistant superintendents would fall in the
chief
in the senior level bracket. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Matuka, thank you for your patience.
Correct.
Thank you. It's my personal opinion. I just want to preface my comment by saying that in principle, I don't think anybody wants the board overly inserting itself into the hiring process inappropriately. But there's a law here where there's some a couple of key ambiguities, and my question is related to how we can proceed in a way that's consistent with the law. So looking at some of the ambiguities around what does review and advise mean, or what what positions are intended for the board to review. To what extent is it appropriate to consult with the author of the bill to find out the intention of what the bill originally was before formulating a final opinion on that bill? I mean, this isn't like something that
Yeah.
was like written into the Constitution in 1814, right? Like Sam lives like a mile from here, so like,
Yeah, I think generally the ex post facto explanation of what was intended is not considered as part of the interpretation of the statute by the court. So if I was to say, hey, there's an ambiguity, judge, regarding this particular provision, you can't have the senator response to the legislation going, well, this is what I really meant. It's what was the intention at the time the legislation was passed, and understanding that the bill, this is a sub A of what was initially proposed by Senator Zurier. So it's if there is, and the state of Rhode Island does a terrible job at actually documenting legislative intent for any of the submissions to make bills. There's zero documentation really about this is what was meant for these specific provisions. So you really can't glean anything from those resources unless you have a transcript of like the Senate hearing where you have people testifying that this is what we mean for this prospective bill. And you don't really have that in any of the resources that we have. So
right, but I
ultimately,
mean, wouldn't you, oh, sorry.
yeah, so ultimately, I think what you have to look at is you have to look at the plain unambiguous language of the statute. So you have to see if there's ambiguity in the specific terms. In this case, there certainly is. And then I think you have to read the entirety of Title 16 in paramateria, where you're trying to see, can I draw parallels and analogies to other provisions in Title 16 to try to give some meaning to these ambiguous terms.
So just like as a follow-up, and sorry, Merlin, this is my last follow-up, like just like specifically speaking, if the senator was here and said, I'd like to come to the, speak to the board and clarify what I meant, because it is a bill in my name by these terms, like that's relevant, right, to your interpretation or not relevant?
It wouldn't be relevant to the court's interpretation.
But
I
court,
think
right?
ultimately,
Like
right, so
your
ultimately.
opinion, like to guide the board on our conduct.
Yeah, ultimately, like this is, I think what we said is this establishes the floor rather than the ceiling. So if collectively, the department and the board say, we want to consider something else, something to see if we're, getting the totality of what was intended with respect to this particular provision, I think they can do that. I think you could also collectively say, we're going to agree that it applies to this scope of provisions, positions, which I think this is what I've kind of heard has happened since. But certainly you can consider as the board, and if there's no one to challenge it, collectively you're all going to agree as to what it means. You can consider whatever you want in reaching that determination.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tuck. And before I shoot the floor to you, Mr. Santos, so I just want to kind of summarize the conversation and the dialogue as I've heard it. So Solicitor Ruggiero provided an opinion that it sets a floor. I've reached out to the superintendent and he's agreed to take a little bit more of an expansive view or interpretation of the, compared to the legal memo that was provided by the solicitor yesterday. There's still ambiguity, but it sounds like it's a conversation that needs to happen collaboratively between the superintendent and leadership regarding ironing out what we're going to agree those ambiguities are in this relationship moving forward. So I just want to note that for the entire board. Mr. Biemi, I don't know if you have your hand up.
He was up before me.
Mr. Chairman Biemi, and then Secretary Santos.
Thank you so much. I think this brings more questions than answers. And I appreciate what the superintendent and the president have agreed to dialogue on. But I think in looking at it, I'm more confused. I was going to ask you about the Accountability Act. I was thinking because of all these things is a turnaround plan, but what you're the takeover rather. But what you're saying now is that it's not a takeover thing. It's like affecting all districts in Rhode Island. Is that correct?
Two things have happened.
Okay.
So what you've had happen is you've had all school committees
Mhm.
throughout the entire state, including Providence,
Mhm.
stripped of the authority to provide advice and consent on the appointment of administrators.
Okay.
What happened post that is you have a specific grant of authority given by virtue of this amendment to the Crowley Act and the takeover as it relates specifically to Providence.
Mhm.
So you're receiving authority under this specific grant that's not present in other communities. That authority affords you the opportunity to provide advice to review and advise the commissioner on the appointment of senior level administrators. Now, I struggled with what constitutes a senior level administrator because there's no definition in the statute. So I had to draw some parallels to other statutes within Title 16. That's how I came up with the idea of it's the direct reports to the superintendent, because I drew a parallel to the Board of Regents authority, Board of Regents, the Council on Elementary and Secondary Education. So I think what I'm saying, Dean, is that but for this legislation, you would not have this authority.
Okay, thank you. Now, I have another question. So after the takeover, let's assume the takeover ends, who will then, after the takeover, appoints the superintendent?
The superintendent is appointed by the board or the school committee of any.
That is after the takeover?
Correct.
Okay, because now we did not appoint the superintendent, we're stripped of that power.
Correct.
So now, if after the takeover, so it means after this takeover, with the school board, whoever is the members of the school board then will have the power to appoint the superintendent. And will have the power to evaluate the superintendent as time goes on. Which means that, but now if
You still, I think you actually have that authority presently in concert with the commissioner.
no, so
Under the modification.
before it wasn't in consultation with the commissioner. When we began this journey, we were not even able to approve anything. When we have meetings here, we just say, oh, we're doing this subject to the approval of the commissioner. The leadership at that time fought to get that out so that it will not be like, okay, anything we do, we can't even sit down, we can't even say hello. We have to say subject to the approval of the commissioner. What I'm saying is the post takeover. So if after the takeover, the school board will be the right body to appoint the superintendent, how do we then interpret this Accountability Act if we are the one appointing the superintendent? However, the superintendent can appoint anyone, they just need the advice, or they don't even need the advice. So I don't know.
Yeah, so
I'm
after
thinking out
post
loud.
takeover, and here's where it gets perhaps a little more ambiguous. I would question whether or not this particular Zurier bill survives post takeover on the intervention as it relates to Providence, but presuming that it does not, presuming that the intervention in Providence goes away with the takeover, then you would resort back to the same authority of every other school board and school committee in the state, and you would not have the authority to provide advice and consent on the appointment of administrators. Your only appointment authority will be that of the superintendent.
But you'll be able to approve or deny, right?
Just the superintendent.
Oh.
Anyways, I reserve my comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Dr. Secretary Santom's next. Mr. Stevens, if you'd like. I feel like we should wrap up this dialogue.
Yeah.
So you'll have one of the final comments, Mr. Stevens. Secretary Santom.
Yes, I don't think mine is a question so much as trying to sort of bring us to some sort of final point to move forward, I think. It's not so different from what the school board president said a few minutes ago. It sounds like I'm a historian, not a lawyer. So the legal argument essentially seems to say that the kind of floor here is direct reports to the superintendent in terms of who we have the ability to review and advise the appointment of. If I'm a historian looking at the context in which these pieces of legislation were passed, I am. The historical context, as well as literal phone conversations I had with Sam Zurier before I put the bill in, as well as some of the other folks involved, would seem to imply that the reason for this intervention into the law was in fact to give the Providence School Board more authority than it presently had under the law with regard to the appointment of at least senior level administrators. In other words, it was intended to add to our power in some fashion or another. It's left ambiguous, right? So I think what we're looking at here is not a legal interpretation in terms of the distance between the floor and the ceiling, but rather a political one or a negotiated one, which is exactly what we've started to do with the superintendent. with, looking at best intentions on all sides. The superintendent has made a concession with regard to us talking about, with regard to who we can review and advise about. Hopefully we can continue to talk about what review and advise means for us as well. I would like to make this argument to you privately. I'll make it publicly here as well. I said it before. I think it is in the best interests of the people of this district and the city and the students for the school board to have a relatively robust power of review and advise, which is to say, they will do a better job of appointing good people who are going to succeed in the city if all the various talents and skills of the school board are brought into effect before the final decision for at least the most senior ones. That doesn't mean all 9 board members participating in the process. It can mean one board member participating in the process. That was done to good effect prior to 2019. We always, generally speaking, defer to the will of the superintendent, but you never know, well, I'll put it this way, you don't know what you don't know until suddenly you're forced to know. So sometimes somebody on an interview committee sees something, hears something, knows something, but we don't know. So we just have people who care and people who can trust, and that should be us.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Stevens.
Done after this. I think to George's, I think you asked kind of a question of like Zaria and his intent. I know Zaria prepared a new legislation similar to this, but to give the board approval power. So I think when we sort of say intent, that's something that the school board can sort of look into on what his intent was previously. Also, this sort of bill was revised a couple times last year, so we can also look at that and see what his intent was previously, and then after it was revised. But that's just that. Really quick to your point, I believe, Mark, when we say like the review and advice, you know what? I'm not even going to go there. I'm just going to go to you really quick. I'm sorry about that. When you say review and advise, also in that new legislation that legislation that was passed in 2019, does that mean so the superintendent appoints, reviews, advise, the board has no say so to any candidate that goes into any district sort of in Rhode Island? Get what I'm kind of saying? Any candidates that sort of the superintendent wants to review, advise, appoint, only the superintendent has that authority, no school board in Rhode Island has that authority.
There's no longer the authority to advise and consent on the appointment of administrators that are recommended by that are appointed by the superintendent.
Does that mean approval? Does it still need an approval process?
Yeah, the consent is basically is the approval process. You have to provide. Formerly, you had to provide consent, which essentially was approval.
So post takeover,
if you withheld consent, they would not be approved.
So post takeover, this board isn't going to have that kind of authority.
Correct.
Okay, got it. And then lastly, to Mark's standpoint, and then I'm going to be done. When we say review and advise, I believe the legislation says by the board. So is that one individual, or is that the full board?
Full board.
Okay.
So that's what I was saying at the outset. So it's the board as a legal entity, not any one individual.
And then, Mr. President, what are we going to do? Because I want to keep talking about this. What are we going to do to get to sort of a conclusion? I think we all have kind of, I think.
Understood. So I think we're all looking to memorialize something, and if you check your inboxes, the superintendent did send a correspondence that begins that dialogue to memorialize sort of what this process looks like moving forward. So I encourage all school board members to take a look at it. It's the beginning of a dialogue. It's not the end all be all, but it gives you a clear picture of what direction this dialogue is going into. Was responsive, and these weren't just my concerns. I heard from a lot of you who reached out to me with concerns after having read the solicitor's legal memo. So I think that's where we're at in the process. It's we're at the beginning of a conversation to amicably sort out these ambiguities. Obviously, they're not going to lawfully resolve these ambiguities, but I think it will resolve it as far as this relationship goes. All right. Any further discussion, comments, questions on this presentation from the solicitor?
I just have.
Chairman, at the end, we have the final word.
The superintendent has assured us that, I just want to put it out there, that these corrections on the finance, something.
Thank you.
I just want to put it out there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman at BME. Mr. Scott, where are we in that process? Are we good?
The contract's been sent to yourself and the chairman.
Oh, so they've been corrected?
Corrected and sent to you, yes.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Scott. Thank you, Chairman Ibiemi, for raising those concerns. All right, moving on to the next item, under presentations, 9.2, integrated facilities management presentation.
Budget. Budget.
I know, you're right, you're right.
Bear with us as we get the PowerPoint now.
We up, Sam, no, I'm playing. Take your time.
It's late. We got everything.
Until Charlie 7:30, so.
All right.
Thank you, gentlemen. In beginning.
Good evening, members of the school board. My name is Sal Durano. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for PTSD. So I'll let Brian LeMay introduce himself really quick.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brian LeMay. I'm Director of Facilities and Capital Planning with PTSD.
All right, so what we have for this evening is just more of an informational session that we brought to the Finance Committee as well. As we are aware, we are in the process of released an RFP process to secure a service provider for our school district, and that includes custodial grounds, landscaping, and all of that. So we were just in that process, and there we go. So what we wanted to share with you was just kind of a brief overview of that process and where we are with that. We hired a third-party company who, our partner, who provided us with the ability to conduct an assessment of our current service provider and all of the work that goes in there. We drafted a timeline, and then the idea was to just get some highlights on the differences between the current contract and what the request for proposal has. And then we'll share some upcoming milestones with you and where we are in that process. So the service provider or the third-party service consultant that was hired did a school visit or site visits of 25 sites, and then by reviewing the current state of those facilities, we looked at what some of those conditions are between the APA levels, and Brian's going to talk a little bit more about what those are, but wanted to provide you with an overview of where we landed based on that assessment. APA.
APA is the Association of Physical Plant Administrators. So it's a standard that's used for developing for custodial, maintenance, and grounds. So it's three separate standards in schools. School settings. It's it's all facility settings.
And so the third-party the consultant that we hired, interviewed district personnel as well, like at school sites, principals, and others. And during that interview process, they did a thorough review of our current standards and the service provider performance. And so with that, here's just a breakdown of, the sites that were looked at, and where they landed. 25 of those sites that were assessed or visited, 52% of those sites fall under an APA 3. Brian, can you share what APA 3 stands for?
Yes, so the APA levels, they have a level 1, which is orderly spotlessness. That's similar to like a hospital grade setting. Ordinary tidiness is level 2. Level 3 is casual inattention. Level 4 is moderate dinginess, and level 5 is unkept neglect. So they really range, and they have unique names to each of them. But the district, based on the third-party review, fell. Some buildings were ordinary tidiness, level 2. Some buildings were casual inattention, level 3, and there were some areas of moderate dinginess, which were level 4. So some of the key findings and recommendations from the assessment from PRP, which was our consultant, the most important one is the first one that's listed is most peer organizations are achieving higher standards of cleanliness and maintenance for roughly the equivalent expenditures. So the value that we're getting for the dollar that we're paying doesn't match up. We're paying too much money for what we're actually receiving on the backside. The conditions observed were highly variable, in fact, strikingly so. The range is enormous, from showpiece facilities to some that look almost uncared for. Our recommendation is that most facility goods and service vendors be retained and managed under the direct control of the IFM service provider. So what that is the IFM is the Integrated Facilities Management Contract. So right now, the district runs parallel facility management to our current service provider. So we are responsible for goods and services, and so is the service provider. And sometimes there's a gray area that falls between both of our buckets. If you move those items that the district is currently doing, not all, but some, over to there, it would be a one-stop shop, basically, for service, so that this way we could focus more on oversight to make sure that we're responsive to the needs, also identifying needs that need to be done in a timely manner. It's going to expedite services, so we're not running parallel or not making phone calls for the same error. The district priorities have changed, and we have a better equipped and knowledgeable staff combined with adequate funding for proactive planning. And this is the first time that's ever been done inside the district, where we have the resources and people in the right place to proactively plan for future work. And as I just spoke about the APA standards, the district ranged anywhere from a level 2 to primarily a level 3, and some areas were identified as level 4, and this is based on a third-party consultant evaluation. In the RFP that was issued, we're trying to raise the standard from a current APA 3 to an APA 2 for quality and cleanliness of schools. The transition in this contract would go from a task-based contract to a performance-based contract, and that's the biggest change that's there. Rather than enumerating the amount of times that something has to be cleaned, right now restrooms are twice a day. As part of the contract and the performance-based contract, you would require the restrooms to be cleaned at all times. That's the level and the bar that you're raising to put. Moving the facilities management contract to the IFM, the Integrated Facilities Management Contract, would be integration of subcontractors. So that's some of the work that we're currently doing inside of the district. Right now, like, we own pest control services, and if there is a mouse inside the building or droppings inside of the building, we are making the phone calls, whereas the service provider is the one that's doing the cleanup and letting the person into the door. We're running almost parallel services to them. When they see the problem, they can make the phone call and direct the problem right to the source, and you can hear it, rather than having a third party now being involved, even though we're the third party. You'd be able to have responsiveness in a very quick matter of time, a one-point source of truth, and then we could respond that back to the district, so this way we make sure that we follow up. So the proposal for timeline, back in November, we hired the consulting firm to assist with drafting the RFP. PPSD released the RFP for the IFM in April. Mandatory virtual pre-bid conference happened on April 6th. Mandatory in-person site visits were held with potential bidders to the contract on April 10th. Optional in-person site visits were held April 11th to April 13th. So what we did was on day one of mandatory site visits, all of the bidders went together instead of a bus trip, and we had an array of buildings that went from some that needed some work and some that were our showpieces. And we wanted to show the array on our standards and having like buildings and having different needs and showing the entire array of needs. Throughout the 4-day of tours, they visited all PPSD facilities, so that this way we show them all of our cards, and they were able to inspect every one of the buildings. Vendor questions were submitted. Proposals from vendors received. We had an informational meeting with the Finance Committee last week, and we will be back in hopefully by June's meeting with a recommendation to award to both Finance Committee and to the school board. And then we have a potential start date of a new contract between August and September of this current year. So for our upcoming milestones, the district and PRP, who is our third-party consultant, is going to be reviewing bids and scoring them appropriately. The district will take these recommendations to leadership at PPSD, leadership at RIDE, leadership at the city. We will bring these for recommendation to both the Finance Committee in June and the school board in June. And as I mentioned, the new contract would begin tentatively August 1st of 23. Happy to answer any questions that we have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Dr. Robinson.
Hi. So one of the things, I don't know if anybody here has read the checklist manifesto, but in health, right, we're like crossing through checklists. Is that something that you're hoping to implement with, because it's just like that for me, it's hard to listen to the fact that we're not already doing a lot of the things that you guys mentioned that you're applying to do now. So is there going to be a checklist process, sort of like a zero accident type of model for all schools? Is that something that you guys have considered?
Yes, we have talked about checklist and safety concerns. One thing we're working on is developing just standardization across the board, because we've had so many different players throughout the years and so much turnover that we're trying to develop a standard that we can take and then mass produce throughout all the buildings of the district. And that is going from our new construction buildings, which we're involved in, and developing a standard for them, and also taking those and bringing those to our buildings that may be 100 years old. So we're looking at the same level of service, whether that building is 100 years old or that building is brand new, across the board. And that this is the first time that we're doing all of these new buildings and trying to develop that standard of custodial grounds and maintenance, whether the building is 100 years old or the building is brand new.
Any other questions, Dr. Robinson? Thank you. Chairman Gill.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to reiterate that the Finance Committee was presented with this last week, and we really love it. And also, as against others, we asked for we made some recommendations, and I'm glad that you guys put it over there. I've seen it. That's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for whether it would be there or not, but I saw that 58, 20, 42%, because it makes it clearer to know that. So they visited 25 schools, but they just put some paid April 3, April 2, but we didn't know what percentage. But now that we know that 58 are on 3.
Not but 3, yes. Yeah.
And 42, so we know what we're doing better. So now, but the thing is, like, and I know you're gonna be bringing this to the Finance Committee.
Correct.
We sincerely hope that it would be a justification in terms of cost savings. Because what we're asking effectively is that while we have many people doing things, we now want to have a coordinated, if I understand it correctly. So such decisions, such statements, such steps has to be like to the advantage of this district so that we're able to monitor things both quantitatively and qualitatively. Because when you're taking a decision, you have to look at those two perspectives. We're not looking at only the quality of what we gain, but as a matter of putting those things together, we have to, those decision making has to be like of quantitative and qualitative effectiveness. So we look forward to a good partnership where we are able to like make sure that this one is a step in the right direction. So thank you so much for the job that you do.
Thanks, Secretary Santo.
So I just have a couple of questions. One sort of, I guess, backward looking, and then the others are forward looking. I guess it doesn't surprise me that there's a variability among our schools in terms of how well maintained they are. I see you mentioned there in Amy Green and Roger Williams essentially have the same architectural design, but Nathaniel Green appears to be well maintained. I assume the line that's cut off there is that Roger Williams is somewhat less well maintained. How do we account for that? Is it building leadership level? Is it just quality of personnel in the buildings? How do we account for the variability? And I know we're moving to get rid of that, but I want to understand.
I think the biggest thing is there's no standardization. So I think by implementing a standardization, we'll have the same accountability at each one of the locations. And right now, the accountability is variable. So we're looking for a fixed, fixed items that will vary.
That actually stands for some of the other things we've done here today. So the other questions I have are much more informational. How many bids have we, the competitive bids have we received? What is, I'll list them quick because they're easy to answer. What is the length of the contract we're talking about? And does performance-based contracting mean that we have essentially an out before the term of the contract is up if performance standards are not being?
So we received 3 formal bids out of the pre-bid conference. After the walkthroughs, we received 3 formal bids that were open on May 4th. If I'm always here, I don't want to misspeak, but I think we have the contract, the RFP, the way it is for
it's a
30.
It's a 35-month
months.
base term, so it'll start August 1 of this year and go 35 months. What does that give you? June 26?
Yeah.
Yes. And then it has 2 option periods to extend by mutual agreement for another 2 years. So it could go 3, 5, or 7 years. Essentially.
Max.
But at a minimum 35 months.
That's correct,
Right?
yes.
So even if performance is not being met.
I think written into the contract, there's financial stipulations, so there will be penalties associated with not hitting your performance-based targets.
There are both incentives for high quality performance and penalties for underperformance baked into this contract.
And of the 3, the 3 were competitive because, one thing you worry about if you set an RFP, the standards are too high, you don't get enough competitive bid. So the 3, we feel like each time we go through this, we'll be able to choose between entities that can meet the requirements, do the job, for the amount that we're paying. Or we don't know yet.
I think we feel really good about the process, how it's gone so far. So to take even a step back, the first pre-bid that Brian and Sal mentioned was a mandatory virtual meeting, and we had 8 vendors attend that, which is a pretty high number. This is a big task. This is a big contract. For the in-person, it came down to 4, and of those 4, 3 submitted bids, and we have a good feeling about that pool of 3. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Any other comments, questions from school board members? I just want to emphasize the importance of this upcoming contract. Zach described it to me as one of the big 3, I believe: transportation, education, and then maintenance. So this is an important contract. I have full trust in our finance committee to do a thorough job of vetting whatever recommendation comes forward. If possible, at that finance committee hearing, I'd like for the presentation and the recommendation to include why, obviously you guys are going to present why the recommendation is a recommendation, but why it was better than the other bids. What made it different? What made it stand out? Why is it better for Providence public school students? So I have full faith in the chairman and his committee that they will do that due diligence. So thank you, gentlemen, for presenting on this topic tonight.
Thank you very much.
All right, last presentation for tonight is a budget presentation. Welcome, Mr. CFO. Deputy Sue, floor is yours.
So thank you so much. Zach Scott, Deputy Superintendent of Operations. I'm here with Chris TC, the Executive Director of Finance. And we're with you again to continue the conversation we had last month around our FY24 budget. So if we flip to the next slide, just to orient you to where we kind of are in this process. In April, we shared some high-level budget planning, including both revenue projections as well as expense projections, and a high-level spending summary on stimulus funds. This month, we are sharing our ordinances as a kind of a historic tradition here, which includes compensation, classification, and appropriation ordinances. Next month, we'll be back to spend some time talking about our ESSER 3 spending. So we look to the next slide beyond this one, just to go through a little bit, because when I first joined the team, it took me a while to digest what these ordinances are, so I'll spend the time just explaining the context for them before we then share some of the highlights on the appropriation ordinance and then answer questions that people may have. So the appropriation ordinance describes funding by category. As you'll note, these categories are part of the Rhode Island Uniform Chart of Accounts. So these are not the categories that we as a district pick because it allows the state to report consistently across the state. So I say that in part because some of the titles are a little wonky, and we not to cast aspersions on the people who made them up, but we're happy to answer questions if things aren't kind of intuitive about what expenses fall underneath. It's important to note that the appropriation ordinance just speaks to our local funds. And as a reminder, our local funds are aid from the city and aid from the state, and that roughly 2/3 of our local aid comes from the state, the other third coming from the city. Our compensation ordinance, that looks at positions and salary ranges for FY24, so you'll see all the positions and titles in the district. This covers all funding sources, not just the local funds, and also notes the ranges for those positions. It doesn't give you the number of positions or where they are, but gives you that's in the classification ordinance, but it does give you the ranges and what's being added or removed from year to year. The last one is a classification ordinance that looks department by department, school by school, and identifies changes in title and FTEs from year to year. Like the compensation ordinance, this looks at all funding sources rather than just the local funds. Go to the next slide. I'll share some highlights on our appropriation ordinance. And so the ordinance is organized into 6 major categories, as you'll see here. The first 2 of which relate to personnel in salaries and benefits, and are roughly 3/4 of our expenses. And so what you'll see here is what was in our FY23 final budget in that first column, what is proposed for FY24, and then a change in spending between years. And anything with parens around it indicates that there's a decline in spending. And then some notes in the far right column. And I'll walk through each of those because it's really important to share like broad strokes about where we're seeing changes in terms of our planned expenditures of our local budget for the upcoming year. So the first line is also the biggest change, where we see a reduction in roughly $7 million in spending on salaries. Much of that has to do with reductions based on enrollment, as well as scheduling changes at the middle and high school. So we were able to reduce FTEs across the board, and that's lowered our spending on salaries. As we shared before, that we've tried to match our personnel spending with our changes in enrollment, and that's to make sure we are planning for a sustainable budget as the years go ahead. The next line is benefits and special items. You can view this as benefits, retirements, and things related to that. And what to note here, it's actually, while it's a net kind of neutral change, there's some increases here and some decreases that counter each one out. So we saw a substantial increase in medical benefits for next year. Over the past few years, we've seen roughly 2% or less increases in medical benefits. This coming year, we see, what was the final number, 8%? 8.7%. We see some of that as resulting from delayed medical care. Obviously that was a fairly surprised to see a number that high. So we've worked closely with the city benefits department, who has their benefits provider sat down and walked us through that. So we feel kind of better understand why those numbers came to be, but that is something that was certainly a surprise in terms of increases from year to year. At the same time, we saw some decreases in retiree medical and state retirement, which ultimately led to a net zero change on that line. In services is another area we are seeing some increases. That in part is just cost of living investments for some of our major service contracts, so the transportation and facilities contracts to the best we can project for next year. And also a rise in tuition expenses. So the district pays three types of tuition expenses. The first is for out-of-district special education placement. The second is for a small subset of schools, the vet and babies that we are obligated to pay tuition for. And then the last one is for students in Providence who are enrolled in charter schools. So that line, those three combined totals that, along with any service contract increases, totals that 4.3 million. The last three lines, as you can tell, are fairly small in terms of the broad changes here. We saw some slight increases in some of the supply line and the capital line. And it's important to note the capital line here is not buildings, it is capital equipment, so computers, technology, things like that. And so we saw as schools, as we moved to student-based budgeting, some changes in how they were spending. And some of that was spending more on supplies and a little bit more on technology and equipment. Excuse me. Utilities, the last one, again, a small increase in absolute terms, a decent increase when you look on a percentage basis. And that is just, as you may have seen in your own kind of personal life, some increases in the cost of electricity and natural gas that we are experiencing in the district as well. So when we take all those changes together, we anticipate spending roughly 1.7 million less next year on our local budget. So kind of a net neutral to slight decline in expenditures for next year. Please.
Just a quick question about the utilities line. I know it's not a big line, but 700,000 is still 700,000. I believe the price of natural gas itself is at a low point compared to, throughout most of 2022, like by a consequential amount. So is the school in a contract already for energy through 2024? Or is it possible that, maybe the forecast is unnecessarily pessimistic?
Yeah, so we are working with, to tap into state purchasing cooperative to lock in rates for the next few years. Even though the price per decatherm could be going down, I think we're seeing increase in carrier costs as well.
Delivery person. Yeah.
So, and you can correct me, I think this to your earlier point, we had been purchasing as part of I think the Rhode Island Association of School Committees that had kind of a cooperative purchasing agreement that had expired, and we were considering continuing on. We found that the rates that they were getting were far higher than what we saw in the marketplace. So we've been working with the city on a statewide purchasing cooperative that we think will lead to lower costs. That would we're working on that to start in the fall. Obviously, we're not spending as much on natural gas at this point in time in the year, but that we can wait a little bit to make sure we get on that right contract when we actually have to start turning on boilers and stuff like that.
Yeah, thank you.
Two obviously big things that we're always looking at are state aid and city revenue. So state aid is not final until it's voted on by the General Assembly. We feel optimistic that what was put in the governor's budget will remain. We've obviously seen, also some concerns about state level budget shortfalls or revenue shortfalls, and we hope that would not impact education aid, but that's something we always need to be prepared for. And then city revenue contribution is something we've shared with this group before. We spent a lot of time with the prior administration and are now in those conversations with the current administration. Again, optimistic, but much to be finalized here, given the impact both to the school district and the city. So with that, I think that concludes the last one, just timeline. We've gone through these presentations. Our budget book should be out this week. We've been putting the finishing touches on it. It adds some more data around what we shared in our ordinances. By June 1, we'll be submitting our consolidated resource plan, which includes our Title I dollars and other non-local funds. And then once we have kind of greater clarity on revenue, the final spending plan will be voted on or approved by the commissioner in July. So with that, I'll leave ample time for questions. Obviously, I know obviously the ordinance has had a lot of information within. As we've done this before, we found it's not super helpful to read line by line because there's just so much in there, but we want to give people time to ask questions. And again, always happy to find time at a future session, at a future meeting or between meetings if questions come to you that we want to discuss.
Thank you, gentlemen. My quick ask is that when the budget books are ready, if electronic version,
Post on the website.
thank you. And if Jared, can you send us a link to that or a PDF of that? That'd be extremely helpful. I know Tony's gonna dig deep into that. Any questions from school board members regarding this presentation for these two gentlemen? Chairman Evian.
Thank you so much. This was presented to us also at the Finance Committee. In the past, we used to have a comparison, a monthly comparison between the budget and the actual. It gave us the ability to catch things before they get out of hands. I think maybe because of the COVID, they stopped. So now that there's no COVID anymore, can we resume that practice so that at least a page will give us like, okay, this is what we budgeted to spend and this is the actual, so that if we're able to catch the variance on time, then we'll be able to know what are the things we need to do, why is it happening this way and all that. So do we have a commitment to getting that?
Would you like to do that monthly or quarterly?
We used to get it monthly, but if you want to do it quarterly,
You have choice. Because, it's not super helpful for us to come in August to talk about expenses in July. Because even it's very, very small. So if you want to start doing it quarterly and then for the first quarter, then we can do monthly after that.
okay,
Okay? That's fine.
that sounds fair. Okay.
Do you want the discussion to happen at finance committee first, then to full board or full board?
We used to get it at the Finance Committee.
Okay.
And if we will have any question, we'll make it like, so if you can make that happen.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Any other questions, comments from other school board members? Mr. Matut?
Just quickly, if you covered this last month and I forgot, I apologize, but how did we do in 2023 or how do we think we're going to do in 2023 versus the original budget?
So, on the expenditure front, we're on track. We might be a little bit below where we had projected expense-wise. The biggest issue, though, is revenue. So we had been in ongoing discussions with the city about a revenue obligation. We went into mediation, and then we reached a 3-year agreement that covered revenue that we believe they owed us for FY 21, 22, and 23. The amount we received wasn't to the amount we budgeted, so there is a revenue shortfall for FY 23. We are using either our reserve funds or ESSER funds to cover that temporarily. So that on the expense side will be fine. It's the revenue shortfall that that's why that city aid is so important, because when we plan for it and then doesn't come through, there's
So where do we net out? I mean, it sounds like there's like a loss for the year 2023. I'm just curious like about the size of it and, you know, how much is coming out of the ESSER funds.
Yeah, if it's okay, I might come back in June, just because it's as we close out our books towards the end of the year, it becomes clearer and clearer. Like, I think it'll be, you know, the amount of revenue we're short is 13 million. It's not gonna be that much. So we'll, as we get closer to the end of the fiscal year, we'll have a better sense of that capital. But it is, you know, somewhere between $5 and $10 million on this one.
Okay, yeah, thanks. I think June update would probably be great for education for all of us, right?
Thank you, Mr. Matuk. Any other comments, questions from school board members? Hearing none, thank you, gentlemen. All right, that's it for presentations. Last item on the agenda, adjourn. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Motion's made. Second. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're adjourned.
Good meeting, Mr. Chair.
I rarely know, I mean.
See our policy advisory board meeting.
Oh, they are very.
Next thing I'll do, watch you do, we can be like one out, one
More than one thing, because you should be putting those presentations on that laptop right there as well, so they could be able to just put them up themselves. You gotta, there's a lot of